right, good evening and welcome to tonight's episode of the Prince Hall Think Tank. This is a monthly show. Now it's a bi-monthly show where we talk about various topics relating to Prince Hall Masonry. My name is Dave Gillarm. I'm your host for the night, and I serve as the Grand Historian for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia, where the Honorable Bruce A. James serves as our Most Worshipful Grand Master. I'm also a past master of Mount Pisgah Lodge number 53, where Johnny R. Williams serves as our Worshipful Master. Now to move on to the rest of our panelists. First, we have Brother James Morgan.
Good evening, everybody. My name is James R. Morgan III. I am the Worshipful Master of Corinthian Lodge number 18, operating under the auspices of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, where the Honorable Norman L. Campbell is our Most Worshipful Grand Master. I'm also serving as the Worshipful Associate Grand Historian here in the nation's capital, and it's such an honor and pleasure to be here. And before I pass the microphone on, I do want to give a big shout out to the Brothers of the Jurisdiction of Pennsylvania. I was just there last Monday for their Grand Lodge annual session, and I had a wonderful time, wonderful reactions from people and whatnot, and just want to thank you all for supporting this great show. Thank you. And with that, we'll pass it on to the immortal, the legendary, the iconic Dr. Ken Collins.
Good evening, everybody. Ken Collins with the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama, where I serve as the Grand Historian. And I'm also a member of Pride of North Birmingham Lodge number 319. Have to always give kudos to my Grand Master Cordy Hawkins and my Worshipful Master, the Right Reverend Dr. Timothy Sanford. Appreciate them for theirs. Really looking forward to the conversation today. We have a really good brother on here who has, as they say, been in the quarries and got his information together. And you cannot refute true work. And no matter what anybody says, it's true work, and you can't get around that. And I'm glad to be here today, and we look forward to the conversation we're going to have.
All right, thank you for that, Brother Collins. And as Brother Collins stated, tonight's guest panelist is Brother John Hairston. And also, if you notice that Brother Preston Collins couldn't be with us tonight, but he sends everyone his regards. Now we're going to have Brother Hairston introduce himself.
Brother John Hairston, editor of The Quill and the Sword. Also the author of Landmarks of Our Father, member of University Lodge number 141.
All right. Thank you for that, Brother Hairston. Tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about his latest book, Landmarks of Our Fathers. This book is looking to change the face of the history of Prince Hall Masonry for all time. It's a book that regarded quite about that they put in quite a bit amount of research into, and one that has a slight bit of controversy. So, Brother Hairston, with this book, what was your inspiration for naming it Landmarks of Our Fathers?
I named it Landmarks of Our Fathers because I was utilizing the word landmarks as a metaphor for history. When we talk about landmarks, landmarks are particular objects that are set in grounds or to set boundaries, which allows a person to always be able to find their way on their journey. Should they become lost, they can always reference the landmark as a starting point to begin over. And I called it Landmarks of Our Father because there's a particular chapter in the Bible that commands us not to remove the landmarks of our fathers. And those landmarks being history is because once you remove the landmark, you deprive the person who's on that path the benefit of the instructional value, the direction, I believe that our history is a very vital part of our identity. And if we find ourselves outside of our rightful history, then really we're truly outside of our identity. We're living a false identity because we're living another person's story or a fabricated story. So I called it Landmarks of Our Fathers because it was, I believed my object with the book was to restore the landmark or the history to its proper place.
That is deep and interesting. And I guess my second question, it has a series of smaller questions intertwined into it. What is this book about? What was your like? How did you get the materials to even write the book? Did you encounter any roadblocks when you was acquiring the resources? So just tell us, what is this book about?
The book itself is dealing with the start and origin of Africa Lodge #1 under the new revelation of primary sources. And the reason why I use that as the tagline is very simple. When I actually began looking for, and this answers the question of what materials were used and if there were roadblocks, was the Africa Lodge records, which were on microfilm at the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. Now, my initial request for the records was just to have them to support the story that I believed, which was March 6, 1775. 15 African-American men were, initiated, raised, on Castle Hill in Massachusetts, later to form a lodge in 1776 and so on and so forth. So I wanted the documentation because I was in actual social media debate circles, and I wanted to have the documents, to say, oh, here's the document 1, here's document 2, here's document 3. So I had no thought about going in to find the material for this book. I was just striving to have the primary sources of Africa Lodge's records. And I actually found out that the records were at the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. I then called, and at that point, Cynthia Alcorn was the librarian. And I bugged her for 2 weeks straight, every single day, call after call, call after call, asking for her to take everything off of the microfilm and photocopy it and send it to me, until she finally was just like, let me get your address, man. And so she gave me, she actually sent me the actual microfilm. And so that started a 1.5 year research on just the records.
Okay. I know one of the things that we're trying to do here is each one of us getting a couple of questions. And I think I've reached my 2-question limit, even though I have about 10,000 more questions. And I guess we're going to move on to either Brother Ken Collins or Brother James Morgan for their question.
Ken, you got it.
Okay. John, I know this has been a journey for you. Because we've, it's been a journey for you when you were going over the documents and weeding through them, giving some of the historians that you work with teasers of information. What do you think was the most important find of the collection that you actually, when you looked at it? I know that the main year is one, but outside of the main year, what was one of the most eye-catching things that you found out from the information that you found?
that John Batt was the first worshipful master of Africa Lodge.
Wow.
Wow, that is true.
That was the most amazing find. I said, oh wow.
Going from there, what, aside from the typical narrative that we always have. You know, Irish Lodge 441. We now know that that's to the wind with this information. What do you want the viewers and essentially historians or amateur historians to take from the work that you've put together as a takeaway and not as a negative associated with the work that you've put together?
This is something that I say in each of my lectures, is that truth is like our mothers. It doesn't matter if she's ugly, we have to accept her. And that's the thing that we have to take away from the work, is that, we can't be afraid of the ugly truth and become victims of a beautiful lie. So I think that as historians, we have to learn how to write what we discover. You know what I mean? And not be afraid to be able to put the information out there. Because, I was warned by some very great minds. They said, brother, you're going to receive some backlash. But I was prepared for that, because my obligation as a historian, and I believe, that historian is a class of brothers by themselves. Historians and researchers are a class, Masonic class, and we have an obligation because we're on the forefront of Masonic education. And so, we have an obligation to make sure that we maintain the integrity of our findings. And so that's the thing that I wanted historians to take from a historians and a researcher's perspective, is that we write the discovery. We don't find something and then say we're going to put that to the side and attempt to maintain the narrative because we don't want to cause any troubles in the water. So, we want to make sure we put the truth out there, irregardless of who accepts it and who doesn't.
James, you're good to go.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, Brother Hairston, I would like to again congratulate you. I know we've done that in the past, but I'd like to publicly congratulate you on this book. I definitely think it's something worthy of perusal by anybody who takes Prince Hall Masonic history seriously. And I also want to commend the level of responsibility that you understood in undertaking it, and you stated it in the book, and just as you stated it just now. Now, I do want to ask, and this is something that I think a lot of people have not paid attention to because they get so focused on. Well, first of all, can you speak to, before I get to my question, can you speak to the date dilemma that you uncovered? I think that's one of the things that a lot of our viewers had asked about, and after you explain that, then I'll be able to kind of go forward with my question a little bit.
Gotcha. Imagine the fact that as long as you've been a Mason, you believe the story of your origin. Mm-hmm. And this is what you teach other brothers, and this is what you wholeheartedly believe. You defend it in debate groups, you write it in articles, you reference it, and all of your references seem to line up with this particular story. And then you find the original records of the very people that you're speaking and attempting to defend, and there's no documentation whatsoever for what you've been taught. None. It becomes a startling reality, to have to ask yourself, where I went looking to support what I believe, but found documentation totally contrary to what I've been taught. And then at that moment, you have to decide, are you going to maintain the narrative, act as if this didn't happen, or are you going to present the truth, begin changing and making adjustments in the way you think? That's what truth does. Mm-hmm. When I was a member of the Moor Science Temple of America, Islam to all the Moors, the Circle 7 says a wise man changes his mind constantly. Why? Because he is always engaging in truths that will cause him to make adjustments. You know what I mean? If you're telling me in all of your research you have maintained the same beliefs throughout without change, that means you haven't found no documentation. You haven't engaged in any documentation. You've engaged in what we call support references. You know what I mean? Now, when you go and look at primary sources, sometimes they change the way you look at a thing. And you have to be ready to make those adjustments no matter if you're the only one who accepts it. You know, because the thing is, I felt comfortable because the documents said it. You see what I'm saying? That's why I felt comfortable.
I understood.
You know?
And with that said, what did the documents tell you?
They told me that the initiation date of Prince Hall and whom we called the Immortal 15 actually happened on March the 6th, 1778, and not March the 6th, 1775, and that there was no Africa Lodge on July the 3rd, 1776, and that there was no Irish Military Lodge involved in the initiation, you know, and that all the brothers weren't raised at the same time. You understand? And actually did the initiation was John Bat himself, who from the paperwork was the first worshipful master of Africa Lodge.
Yeah, and I can see how that would diverge a lot from what I know from what I was taught coming in, and I think what a lot of people, especially our viewers, were taught as well. But again, you're saying you pulled this from the African Lodge records with that you got on microfilm. So hey, if that's what documents say, that's what documents say. Now, with that being said, I want to shift gears to something that I don't think a lot of people have really paid attention to from your book, but something that I found to be one of the strengths in my initial perusal of it, which was your research that you did on William Hall and the Hall family, and how you basically were able to try to track Prince Hall and his relationship to the Caucasian Hall family. Can you talk a little, just a little bit about that? Because I thought that was very, very fascinating. How you approached that.
Yeah, I begin to, because see what happened was I was coming across the part of the research that dealt with Prince Hall as a Revolutionary soldier, Revolutionary War soldier. And so I found, of course, what everybody else found was the record with the 3 Prince Halls, the ones from Medford, the other one from Medford, and the one from Dartmouth. And so what happens is when people get to that document, they say, well, Prince Hall was from Boston, and so he wasn't from Medford. So therefore, none of these 3 are him. And because that there was 6 Prince Halls contemporary with each other, that there's no way to definitively find Prince Hall among the soldiers of the Revolutionary War. And so I utilized William Hall, who actually was the owner of Prince Hall, who manumitted him in 1770, and ended up finding out that William Hall actually gave land to Prince Hall. If anybody has read the letter of manumission that was actually signed by William Hall, you get from that tone that he really wasn't looked at as the average slave, that he was sort of looked at as sort of a helping hand, but he was also looked at almost as family. And so when he was manumitted, it wasn't as if William Hall just said, okay, you free to go do your thing, and that's that. He actually gave him land. So now what happened was I said, well, in order for me to find out whether one of these Prince Halls, the 3 that's mentioned on the Revolutionary War records, was the actual Prince Hall of Africa Lodge, I needed to study Medford. So I went to the Medford Historical Society and I began a search on the Hall family. I received a book called The Hall Family in New England, which is actually named in the bibliography. When I went through there, I traced the Hall family from Medford to Boston. That the family actually was the largest in Medford. And so when I traced that, I said, well, let me see if I could trace Prince Hall. The next thing I found through Medford Historical Society were the tax records. Now, what was interesting about the 1778 and 1779 tax records of Prince Hall was that he was listed as a non-resident. See, that right there told me something, because that meant he had land in Medford, but he didn't have to live in Medford. He was a non-resident who was paying taxes on land he owned in Medford. So once I went there, I said, oh, this is Prince Hall. Next thing I found was a book on famous Revolutionary War heroes, or what they consider Revolutionary War heroes of Medford. And the book actually revealed that there was a Prince Hall who they considered from Medford and had enlisted in Medford, who was the worshipful master, and they called him the founder of Negro Masonry. This is in their listings. So I said, this is Prince Hall. So then I began to trace William Hall even more, found out that he was the president of the Irish Charitable Society, that his family also had links to Barbados and Jamaica slave trade. This says, wait a minute, you know. So yeah, more to come on that, because there is a definitive, irrefutable, undeniable link between William Hall, Stephen Hall, and Richard Hall to Barbados and Jamaican slave trade. And so all these things started coming up, and it just made for just more interesting material to closely relate Prince Hall to.
And you know, and that's interesting to me, because as some of our viewers may know, William Grimshaw, who was a past Grand Master from my jurisdiction here in Washington, D.C., actually wrote a now debunked book or discredited book where he stated Prince Hall had ties to Barbados and that he was born in Barbados or what have you. And you know, and I'll be honest with you, my first time visiting Boston, it wasn't on a Masonic trip, but well, let me say my last time visiting Boston, rather, I noticed how many Caribbean people there were there, and that kind of hit me. I said, I wondered if Prince Hall could have had a Caribbean origin, and maybe that was something passed down through oral tradition. And so when I saw that in your book, I just thought that was a really fascinating aspect of it. So I really appreciate you breaking that down for us a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Dave.
Yeah, the couple of questions I have, and I'm gonna start, and for all the viewers out there, and if you a member of the Prince Hall Think Tank Facebook group, you're gonna see the two files I'm about to post. Because now that Brother Harrison stated it, that John Batt was the first worshipful master at African Lodge. I know we talked about this before, about another document that was out there stating that, and I'm gonna read this directly from the newspaper article. This is dated March 7th, 1800, and this is from the Salem Gazette. It's under the title of it is "From the Farmers Weekly Museum," and it says, in the metropolis of the, I guess, later fate, there's a respectable lodge of Freemasons comprised of free people of color. We learned that on that day that General Washington died, the master of this African lodge died also. And this was a man named James Hawkins. And I know me and Brother Harrison talked about this, but what have you found on James Hawkins himself? Was he actually the master of African Lodge in 1800 or prior to?
No. He was not the master of the lodge. He was definitely a member. In fact, his name is spelled two different ways in the records. One of them is spelled Hawkins. The other one is Howkins. They're the same person. They held the same position, so we know it was the same person. The two secretaries, and you'll find this in the records, that between secretaries there was different spellings for the same people, or different spellings for the same words. You could see that maintained through there with the difference of the secretaries. But yeah, he was definitely a member of Africa Lodge. but he was definitely not ever the master of the lodge.
That is it. I guess my whole point was that is over the years there's been a lot of information that's been put out about African Lodge, and now we're starting to see what's actually the truth and what has been basically some items that's been false. So my next question is, we've had researchers like Charles Wesley. We've had the Flaxes. We've had Blue Light. We've had tons of researchers over the years. In your research, has there been any other researcher that has found the March 6, 1778 date and maybe kind of mentioned it but never actually published it?
Are you speaking of all? Are you speaking all Masons? Or are you saying among Prince Hall authors and writers?
Either one.
Well, yes. The date was actually spoken of in 1974. This was the first time that anyone had actually challenged the date, and it was actually challenged by Harold V.B. Voorhees, who was a Caucasian Mason, and he was very prominent, man, was a member of a lot of different houses and orders and rites. But he wrote in 1974 and published a paper, which you can actually find in the appendix of Landmarks of Our Fathers, because I wanted to give honor, you know, to the fact that he did indeed was the first one. This is the first time we ever read someone come and challenge the original start date. So I've actually put it there so people can read that 1974 paper in full. And he was the first. The second person was John Sherman, and his co-author was Henry Coyle. And they published the book. Oh, the name of the paper by Harold Voorhees, you can go look this up. It's called Freemasonry Among Colored People in the USA. And it was published in 1974. And the second particular publication was by John Sherman and Henry Coyle, which was called A Documentary Account of Prince Hall and Other Black Fraternal Organizations. That was published in 1982. They were the first ones to actually come out and present documentation. And the funny thing is, they were actually in possession or had access to the same records that I had on microfilm. Yeah,
that's interesting.
Very, very much so. Very much so. Now, I'm sorry, Brother Gillen.
Yeah. Before we get to the next, for get to your question, for those viewers that have questions, feel free to go to the Prince Hall Think Tank Facebook page, the Prince Hall Think Tank Facebook group, and post your questions. All right, now, Brother Morgan.
What I was going to mention was actually something. This was a very personal experience for me because, you know, as Masons, we're taught to always be reflective of not only of our experiences in the lodge but also outside of it. And I remember, you know, not too long ago when I wasn't a Mason, but when I was, you know, kind of learning the history of Prince Hall Masonry as it had been taught to me, you know, two books always stand out in my opinion. Black Square and Compass, which I talk about often. I often refer to as the book that changed my life. But also this book right here, which is Prince Hall Life and Legacy. And I remember distinctly reading, again, this was going back almost 8 years ago now, reading this passage here on page 34. And anybody who has the book, you can check it out for yourself. On page 34, about halfway down, it says, at this period of the outbreak of war, a significant event occurred. On March 6, 1778, Prince Hall and 14 other free blacks were initiated in Masonry through John Batt, a representative of Irish Military Lodge number 441, working under the authority of the Grand Lodge of Ireland. Right? That's the second or third paragraph on page 34 of this book here. Brother Morgan,
what I would like for you to do is go to the front page when it tells you what edition and year that was actually published.
This particular edition, my personal copy here, this is actually the third edition published in 2010. Y'all can see that very clearly there. Okay. So yeah.
The second edition was published in 1983.
Yes, sir.
The first edition was actually published in 1977. Now, in the first edition, on page 34, this is in 1977, he used the date March the 6th, 1775. In fact, if you go to the Quill and the Sword, I wrote the article called "The Conundrum of Charles H. Wesley," because there's a difference.
I'm sorry, not to interrupt you, but just for those who may not know, what is the Quill and the Sword, and where do they go for that?
The Quill and the Sword is a blog that I maintain. In the you could just look it up on the Google it, the Quill and the Sword, and you'll see the Quill and the Sword 357 blogspot, and you can check out the article there. It's called "The Conundrum of Charles H. Wesley," because what I found was, because when I started doing my presentations, I was building and started doing, because at the same time I was writing a book, I knew that I was going to have to do some type of presentation or lecture on this thing, on this book. So I began to look at all of the Prince Hall authors to see if there was any Prince Hall authors who ever used the date March 6, 1778, or was there any time that they had reviewed the work of Harold Voorhees or John Sherman and Henry Coyle to see how they addressed it, if so. And when I went back, the only person that has ever used March 6, 1778 was Charles H. Wesley, but he used it in his second edition in 1983, 1 year after John Sherman and Henry Coyle had published the book, Documentary Account of Prince Hall and Other Black Fraternal Organizations, in 1982. Now this is significant because in 1977, when he first put out the book, he had the date March the 6th, 1775. Then 1 year after the documentary account of Prince Hall and Other Black Fraternal Organizations, he then puts out a second edition of the book in 1983, and he changes only one number in the entire manuscript. The entire manuscript of Life and Legacy, if you go and read the 1977 edition and the 1983 edition, they read the same. The only thing that's different is in the introduction, where he says it's been this many years since we wrote, and then he'll say how many years, and then that page 34, he changed the 5 to an 8. And usually, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. And that was the thing that kind of it hit me a little bit, because I was fortunate in that being able to go up to Howard University's Moreland Spingarn Research Center, where Dr. Wesley did a lot of his research, and he was a former professor there. I actually was able to get access to a first edition actually signed by him, and I was able to go check that. But I remember distinctly an incident before I became a Mason, where when I was reading this, and I think it was my second read through, I noticed the 1778 date in this particular copy of the book, and I remember distinctly saying, "Oh, that must be a typo," and I skipped right over it and moved on. And I'm honest enough to admit that that didn't throw off a red flag to me. I just said, "Oh, it must have been a typo, the printer or whatever," and I just kind of moved on from it. And so when it came back up, and when I know when you were doing this research and you and I had kind of been talking privately, that hit me. I said, wow, that's kind of interesting that slipped in there. And as I always say, if it was good enough for Wesley, it's good enough for me. But that really kind of hit me how he did that. So I definitely want to commend you for having the mind to recognize that.
John, I wanted to hop in and ask you. I'm a Scottish Rite guy as well, so I love the conversation of the Scottish Rite Masonry and what the French call the high degree Masonry. So can you tell the viewers, particularly what you found inside of some of your research in terms of what we consider high degree Masonry, even back then amongst Prince Hall and his cohorts?
Good. Yeah, I'm gonna do this, and this is actually the research that I'm doing now for a paper for the Lux et Tenebris. Shout out to the Phylaxis Society and all the members of the Lux et Tenebris. I'm actually going to publish a paper through the Lux et Tenebris on the African Mark and Pastmasters Lodge of Boston, where, and if anybody understands Royal Ark Masonry, they understand that Mark, the Mark degree is the degree that's the intro into Royal Ark Masonry. And I found the bylaws for a Mark Lodge from 1860 to 1821. We find where they were actually conferring the Mark degree and the Pastmaster degree. Now, prior to them actually conferring the degree Pastmaster, they used to elect a Pastmaster in their lodges. George Middleton was one of the first elected Pastmasters of Africa Lodge. It wasn't a position that you received after you got out the seat with them. They elected you. That was an interesting thing that I found in the records. Then I found the conferral of the Mark and the Pastmaster's degree. And then, of course, we find the fact that there were Royal Ark Masons as early as 1823, 1824 in Africa Lodge, because these brothers actually wrote off to England asking for permission to confer the other 4 degrees. And I don't want us to confuse those with the Mark, Most Excellent Master, Pastmaster, and Royal Ark. But it was actually the Royal Ark, Knights Templar, Super Excellent Master, and the Most Excellent. Those were the 4 steps at that point. And that's what they were striving to confer in their lodges. And it is my personal belief that St. Andrews and a lot of the lodges had a lot to do with that, them receiving those degrees.
That's actually the segue that, and you know, this is something that I was really interested in. You know, we talked about it numerous times. The segue between St. Andrew's Lodge / Grand Lodge and African Lodge, and if you can just give a brief overview of the relationship between Prince Hall, the Prince Hall brothers, not to say Prince Hall brothers, the African Lodge brothers, and just a quick, you know, view through history of African Lodge, what's going on with African Lodge, what's going on with Lodge St. Andrews, and how that kind of flows through history, what the symbiotic relationship they kind of have at that time.
When you, I actually had the opportunity to speak with the Secretary, Jonathan Taylor from St. Andrew's Lodge, and go into some of the records that they had. Now, the one thing that we didn't find readily was the Joseph Warren story, where it was stated that Joseph Warren was supposed to grant a charter to Prince Hall, but he ended up dying in the Battle of Bunker Hill. And so those brothers didn't receive that particular charter, because we can't really find any information in St. Andrew's records or in Africa Lodge of any connection prior to around 1819, 1820, 1821, when Africa Lodge, when we have over 30 visitations, but not just from St. Andrew's Lodge, but the records say from lodges, from the various lodges, brethren from the various lodges around the city. Okay, and so we know that from our records prior to 1845, there was only one lodge composed wholly of black brothers, and that was Africa Lodge. And so for these particular brothers to come out there to Africa Lodge, even because the thing that struck me was that the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, in response to the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania making an accusation in 1818, because the Grand Lodge of New York was investigating the Boyer Lodge or Africa Lodge of New York, and they stated the fact that they had received a charter from Africa Lodge of Boston. And Pennsylvania stated the fact that they had chartered a lodge of African men. Pennsylvania made that accusation to the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. And the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts stated in their proceedings, stated the fact that we don't countenance any visitations from African Negro Masons, and neither have we visited any of their lodges. And it was sort of a funny statement, because I'm sitting here looking at records with over 30 visitations from lodges under the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. You know what I mean? And I mean, I'm talking about by name. Most of these, some meetings, they would just say visitation from brethren from lodges around the city. And then when it was maybe 3 or 4 of them, they would name them by name. And then I would go into records like St. Andrew's records, Royal Ark Chapter records, St. John's records, and find these brothers' names on their robes. You see what I'm saying? And some of them we still haven't found on their robes, but we know they come from lodges around it. So I found that to be sort of funny, like, you know, the relationship between the predominantly Caucasian lodges in Africa Lodge. But the one thing that we I know later on we find was that a lot of the Royal Ark, a lot of the Mark Masonry, a lot of the way Africa Lodge did things was heavily influenced by St. Andrew's Lodge. There were a time when St. Andrews actually assisted in the installation of some of Africa Lodge's officers. And in St. Andrew's Lodge, according to a document that was sent to me from St. Andrew's Lodge, they actually fought with the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts regarding the recognition of Africa Lodge, because you have to, and I'm gonna say this, and I'm done with that point. 1791, 1792, the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts formed. They had the same lineage as Africa Lodge, the Grand Lodge of England. Yet Africa Lodge was not invited to the formation of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. And so St. Andrews, and because they were sort of rivals to the St. John's Grand Lodge in Boston at that time, they sort of befriended Africa Lodge, and they sort of fought and advocated for the recognition of those brothers.
John, I had one more follow-up question, because what you brought up in your book, it's something that's, you know, we need to take a look at. And in terms of our Grand Lodge, you know, our Grand Lodge website, Dave and I have talked about this, and it's updating the history in terms of what we've learned from the actual documentation. Can you just give us another quick narrative of Prince Hall's journey through himself into Freemasonry?
Now, most of this because Prince Hall didn't leave any real narrative as to his journey prior to Freemasonry and what attracted it to him. But as historians, sometimes what we do is we put together our opinion or our perspective of a particular event based on what we read in the records, you know. And so, and because Prince Hall did have letter books, and the things that he talked about with William Moody, and the things that he talked about with the Grand Secretary White and other particular people regarding Freemasonry, it is my personal belief that Prince Hall saw Freemasonry as an opportunity to place the African-American community in Boston on the level with Massachusetts white men. At this time, they were very much in the fight to abolish slavery in Boston. You understand? He himself being an ex-slave, and many of those brothers who were ex-slaves. And they were actually, a lot of the members of Africa Lodge prior to becoming Africa Lodge were engaged in framing legislation that would abolish slavery. In fact, Prince Hall wrote a letter. There was 3 brothers who were kidnapped from Boston and sent to the West Indies, and they wrote a letter that brought the brothers back. One of them was a member of Africa Lodge. And so these brothers, being engaged in a fight for freedom for themselves, looked at the American Republic and their struggle and revolution for independence and saw that many of the forerunners were Masons, and the rhetoric that they were using were reflective of Masonic values of freedom, justice, consciousness. You know what I mean? And so they thought, hey, this is something that we want for ourselves. And what better way to get it than for us to go into this particular organization, and maybe we can find equality and we can find some justice, you know, through Freemasonry. This is why when we look at Freemasonry practiced by African Americans, it has that cultural tinge to it than you do when you see Caucasian populations operating in Africa, Freemasonry. It's because that Freemasonry to us was a means of striving to progress in civil rights and social rights and so on and so forth. This was a vehicle for us. And so that's why it looks different. The historical narrative is different. You see what I'm saying? And so that's what I believe that Prince Hall saw when he saw Freemasonry. You know, we can find this in a lot of the letters that he wrote. Yeah.
Brother Harrison, if I can interject real quick. That was one of the reasons why I brought up the William Hall situation earlier in his history, because the thing that I thought was so fascinating that you put in the book is a photograph of William Hall's his headstone. And you mentioned the Irish. I didn't want to try to find it in the book now, but basically I know there was an organization he was in, the Irish
Charitable Society.
Irish Charitable Society, right? And one of the things, you know, having worked with a lot of historical sites and different things, one thing that Annette Gordon Reed, who is the author of the she basically wrote the history of the Sally Hemings, Thomas Jefferson story. One thing she talks about is the idea that we have today of what it means to be an American, right? Right. And what do I mean by that? Well, today we all say, well, I'm an American. We, you know, if you're born here, you're American, regardless of our different racial or cultural differences. But the world that Prince Hall and those guys would have known was very different, even from an identity standpoint, especially with the idea that, first of all, there was no United States of America at a certain point, up to a certain point in their life. But even culturally, this was a very transatlantic world that these people were living in. That you had people who were Irish, and they just happened to just come here last week. You had people who were British. You had people who were Scottish, French, and of course you had African. And even that was a misnomer, because everybody of African descent at that point did not necessarily identify as one group of people. Okay, right. So the reason why I bring that up is because I actually, just speculating, I actually thought that it was quite fascinating that William Hall would be involved in an Irish charitable organization, a benevolent society, which is something that that you and I both study. And so I really think Prince Hall probably would have seen joining Masonry or starting a lodge as you said, as a means to an end, but also seen it as a way to say, you know what, we need something, for ourselves and as men. And you look at what happened with, we did a previous episode here on the Think Tank about the AME Church, right? Mm-hmm. And you look at the Free African societies that were propped up all over the Northeast. And I think that, as you said, Prince Hall probably saw it as another way of organizing for civic and civil rights. To change gears just really quickly, one of the things I think has put people on edge about your book, or about the information that you're putting out, is the idea that you're somehow trying to discredit or damage Prince Hall affiliation's legitimacy, or you're trying to attack the brand, or so to speak, or what have you. I know you put some very eloquent words regarding that in the book, but if you could just speak to that very quickly, about what was the intent when writing. I know you kind of mentioned it earlier, but if you could speak to that, because I know a lot of people have kind of been on edge about that, and that's kind of come through in the chat today.
Right. Anybody that knew me prior to writing the book know I was a staunch defender of Prince Hall affiliation, period. Myriads of social media debates, I defended Prince Hall affiliation. I still defend their regularity. That has not changed even with the publishing of the book. The regularity of Prince Hall affiliation is unquestionable. Here is the thing. Most of the people who initially react as such, the question is, have you read the book? That's the question. Because I think that the 9th chapter of my book pretty much sums up the intent and my sentiment in writing the book. First of all, I'm a historian. You understand? Whether I'm a Prince Hall Mason, whether I'm a mainstream Mason, whether I'm a Mason, not at all. I was a historian and researcher before I came to Freemasonry. Okay, so I was already doing research and doing a lot of study around things before then. My thing is, I don't ever want to be caught knowing the truth and not dispensing it. You understand what I'm saying? And so to me, it didn't bother me to find that there was some illegitimacy in the way that Prince Hall and these brothers were actually initiated into Freemasonry, because I knew that in 1784 they had received a charter from the Grand Lodge of England. And ain't nobody questioning the Grand Lodge of England. You might question when they were started at this point, but you're not challenging their regularity. And I said this in the preface of my book. There are 3 stages of development on the records of Africa Lodge. The first one is from 1778 to 1784. The second one is 1784 to 1827. And the last one is 1827 to 1846. My book only deals with 1778 to 1784 before the charter. You see? So a person has to actually read the book. If you don't read the book, you're liable to come up with anything. You understand? You're liable to come up with any conclusion, but you got to read the book. And I'm going to tell you, man, this is an epidemic. You understand? It's an epidemic, and it's an actual deficiency in why we haven't progressed historically. You understand, is that we're ready to accept a conclusion without really doing any background research. We're not really putting in the work as researchers to find out what's happening. We just jump to a conclusion. You understand? Oh, he's trying to damage. How in the world can you damage? How can I damage? How can my book? Do you know how many books have been written against Prince Hall affiliation? Do you know how many authors who are greater than me with resumes greater than mine have written against Prince Hall? My book isn't even against Prince Hall. I'm talking about authors who actually set out with the intent, through propaganda, some by lies and some by half-truths, to destroy the credibility and the regularity of Prince Hall. Are they unrecognized? No, they still recognized, except in southern states. What I'm saying is they're largely recognized all over the world as being legitimate and regular, with all of those particular publications still extant. So there's no way in the world that a book is going to do any damage to the regularity of Prince Hall. That's a conspiracy mindset. That's paranoia that needs to be confronted. Go read the book. Go read it for yourself, you know, and stop jumping to conclusions. That's my message to that particular demographic of people. Go read the book for yourself. You'll see it wasn't I never had an intent from the very first. It's just to, any historian wants to correct the history. That's what we do. When we see an inconsistency, hey, let's correct that. Why? Because why would we want that? What would you rather have? Would you rather have a person with a negative intent or a hostile intent write the book? Or would you have a brother who actually can appreciate the legacy of Freemasonry to write the book with care and to treat the issue professionally? You understand what I'm saying? And that's what I've done. And so anybody who questions that, I can guarantee you they haven't read the book, period.
Okay.
Woo!
So now we're going to get into a couple of the audience questions. The first question is, during your research, did you come across any other lodges that accepted men of color? That's to Brother Hairston.
In my research, okay, yes, there were lodges that accepted brothers of color. The question is this, because we talked about this before. Were there brothers who were accepted in any lodges from 1778 to 1784? I have asked for documentation time and time again. Show me any time from the first lodge that was established in this country. I don't care what colony. You show me one African American that was actually admitted into a lodge between the year of the first lodge all the way to 1778. And that's all I asked for. If you can show me any documentation, I'm satisfied. But up to this point in my research, I have not found such. Now, there was a brother named John Pine who was accepted in the Grand Lodge of England, but that was in England. That wasn't happening in America. Now, that's just the truth. You understand what I'm saying? Now, afterwards, you know, during the 1800s, brothers began being admitted into lodges. And I think that happened because of the relationship between Africa Lodge and a lot of the lodges surrounding Boston. You see what I'm saying? But prior to 1778, we don't find any African Americans being admitted. And I'm saying I haven't found it personally. If you have found it, then present the evidence. If anyone has found it, please present the evidence, and I will readily accept it, and I will change my view. But today, on October the 19th, 2016, I have found not one African American that was accepted in Freemasonry from the year of the first lodge in this country to 1778.
You know what's funny, Brother Hairston? I've been in numerous threads, and you know, because you've been on the same ones, and I fought tooth and nail with brothers that have said that there were black brothers in other lodges. There were brothers in particular Lodge St. Andrews prior to African Lodge, and I know you're aware of this because we've all reviewed the documents. Even, you know, this what is it, the St. John Grand Lodge minutes, the conversation at the feast, you know, when they talking about the oldest member, then they also talk about the first one, the gentleman that was I think his last name was Smith, where they talk about he was the first, but then they also talk about the refugees, the Spanish refugees that came, and they were the first members. But that wasn't until the 1820s, right. I want to say, right, 1820s. Right. So, you know, that conversation in particular, and what we can say is, from the conversations that we have had and the research that we have had, we have no reason to believe that they were quote unquote not allowed to join per se, but most of the men of color that ended up joining, they came through African Lodge. But right. we end up seeing members later after African Lodge is up and running, where they end up becoming members in New York, et cetera, et cetera.
Now we do have to we have to make sure that we're very clear. There is no record that Prince Hall ever attempted to get into a predominantly white chartered lodge. You understand? There's no record. I haven't seen it. Again,
absolutely.
In my research,
right.
I have found no documentation that shows that Prince Hall ever attempted to get into any lodge. Now, I've heard that said, but once I got the records of Africa Lodge, I learned not to believe anything. I wholeheartedly have shifted my perspective. I am no longer taking stuff on face value. I got to see it. I need to see supporting evidence. Show me a newspaper article, a letter of correspondence, somebody's grandmama writing on the back of a receipt or something. Show me, because I haven't seen any documentation where Prince Hall ever attempted and was rejected, and therefore that was his reason for wanting to create a lodge full of black men. What I believe is that he just saw their community as separate from the other. and he decided to do something for his community. You understand? And that's just what I believe. Until somebody can show me a documentation. I mean, please show me what lodge. What's the name of the lodge that he went and knocked on the door of? Did he put in a petition? Did they read it? I mean, what proceedings can we find it in? I mean, the burden of proof is on the person that says it. Yeah.
All right. So next question. This is to you again, Brother Hairston. Since you have publicly come out on multiple known Masonic publications with your research for this topic, has anyone been able to produce anything to dispute your research?
Listen. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Listen, before I published my book, in the course of publication, I sent my manuscript to the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. I sent it there, and I sent it to the Conference of Grandmasters. And I did so because I knew the nature of the information that I would be presenting, and I did not want to publish the book without them having an opportunity to address the material. So I sent it to them, and I said, if you all can produce one document with the date 1775 to 1777, I don't care what it is. If you can show me the operation of a lodge, the initiation of 15 African-American men, I'm good. I will stop the publication of my book. I will not, because you will have effectively refuted everything with one document. Now, from there, my paper traveled via the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts to a few of their historians who gave me phone calls to debate me regarding what I put in the paperwork. Still no documentation. Via the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, my paper went out to 3 academic historians who wasn't even Masons. They weren't even affiliated with Freemasonry. Cherno Sese, who was the writer, the writer of the first chapter of All Men Free and Brethren, Peter Hinks, who was a writer of All Men Free and Brethren, and Stephen Kanowitz, who was the writer of All Men Free and Brethren. They asked me to cite my work. You understand what I'm saying? That now I knew that this happened because Cherno Sese gave me a call, and he asked me to cite my work. Now my question to him was very simple, because I had read All Men Free and Brethren, and in his first chapter he wrote March 6, 1775. Although he stated the fact that he was in possession of the same records that I had. So you know what my question was? Well, if you had the same records that I had, then why did you write March 6, 1775? His answer to me was because he wasn't a Mason, he didn't want to cause no controversy amongst them. So from there, the paper traveled on, and we still haven't picked up a document yet, with no disputation, you understand, by anyone. And we have given enough time. We've given ample, time to dispute the work. Now it's published. It's on record now. I can't take nothing back. So they still have the opportunity. But all I'm saying is, all it takes is one document. If you can find a document dated from 1775 to 1777, you will have effectively refuted landmarks of our father.
I wanted to do a follow-up with another question, and I'll do an intro to it as well. It says, how was the reception of the members of Prince Hall Grand Lodges towards this book? More specifically, have you heard from all the Grand Lodges that actually have a copy of this work? And I want to start off just by saying it. Not even, I want to say a week or a week and a half ago, I actually sat down in a meeting with some of the some Grand Masters, Prince Hall Grand Lodge, Grand Masters of Prince Hall Grand Lodges, and I say it affectionately that I had a conversation with Grand Master Wilbert M. Curtis of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas, and I hope I'm not stepping out of bounds, Grand Master Curtis. I know you're watching, that he's interested in history, particularly on Prince Hall Freemasonry, and we had a great discussion. And we were talking about the confines and of the book and what you actually found. And he loves what you found. He loves in the conversation that he and I was having with the other grandmasters. And you remember I purchased copies of the book, so the Southern grandmasters would all have copies of it, and all of them are interested in it because, a lot of people think that they're grandmasters and they're just grandmasters. A lot of the grandmasters are actually interested in the history, because these guys, if it's something new, they actually want to see it. And I don't think it's the knee-jerk reaction that people think.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually, they're interested in it. They want to read it. They want to see it. When you first shared some of the documents with me, I'm blown away. I'm calling you. Remember when we went through some of the military information when we were going through with the John Batt stuff? Yeah. And I really think that and again, I can only speak from my experience of talking with some of the grandmasters, and with Grandmaster Curtis in particular. He was excited about the information, and that excitement of our conversation sparked the excitement of some of the other Prince Hall Grand Lodges, where the Grand Masters are basically at their Grand Lodges talking to the folks that are busting the mail open, saying, "Hey, where's my book? I want to read this." So, could you kind of expound on what you received from some of the Grand Lodges or jurisdictions?
Right. Honestly speaking, I haven't received any negative comments on the book. Now, of course, the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Washington had to do a disclaimer for legal purposes, but it wasn't the Grand Master of that jurisdiction would tell you. He wholeheartedly embraces my work. And so I personally have only received what I would view as a negative reaction from one grand jurisdiction. That's it. Everyone else has. I was just in New York, maybe two days on Monday, and did a presentation there. And the Grandmaster, Most Worshipful Larry Mitchell, another thanks for him for allowing me to come into that jurisdiction and present under the circumstances in which he did. You understand? And allowed me to come there and give my presentation, and he wholeheartedly received it. And I think that's what it is. People have to hear it. They have to read it and then hear the presentation for themselves, and then they'll be able to make that decision. But I haven't received any negative reactions except from, like I said, from one Grand Lodge. That's it.
Well, we got another question here, Brother Harrison, because the people seem to be loving this information. They want to know at the bottom of it, of the cover of the book, you call this the collection series. So when you say series, that sounds like it's going to be more than one. Are you planning to do a follow-up work to this? And if so, do you have an ideal time period for when you plan to release it?
I do want to do a series. It's my hope to do one for Africa 459 and then do one for Africa Grand Lodge. And I believe that then that will, for me, complete the series. Right now, I'm focused on another project for the time being, because I feel like, sometimes as a writer, and especially brothers who operate in the esoteric, they can understand what I'm saying. You can discern movements. You understand? You can discern movements, and you can discern shifts and paradigms and things happening, especially after receiving the news by Brother Chris Holdap on Freemasonry for Dummies, where he's talking about now there is intervisitation in Kentucky. And so I believe that my next project is a work that's necessary for the times that we're in. I want to assist. I want to contribute to the breaking down of our baby Berlin walls, so to speak. You understand what I'm saying? And so my next project is really going to address a social issue in Freemasonry. And so that will be my next book. And then after that, I will resume the series, because I think it's time. It's time for that particular topic.
Okay.
All right. Next question. Have you been made aware of any Grand Lodges, due to this new knowledge, actively changing their version of history they propagate upon their Grand Lodge websites?
I don't think at this, the book was just published in June. This is a process. It's a process.
Mine is coming. I know Dave, you working on yours too?
Well, actually, if you go to the Georgia website, there actually isn't anything about African Lodge or Prince Hall on the website. It's strictly about Georgia history.
Right. Yeah. So it's like it's a process, and I'm fully aware of that. So I'm not looking for everybody to just jump out there, and people are still trying to make their minds up about the information. And you have to, something of this nature, you have to give Grand Lodges, because that's also a process that has to be ran through the Grand Lodge, so on and so forth. There's a lot of conversations that have to be had to change official histories and things of this nature. So at this point, I know that there's a lot of positive reception for the information, but as far as any Grand Lodges actively now changing just because of the book, no. I think that's going to be a process, and it takes some time for that to happen.
All right. The next question, I think we kind of already touched on it. Did you meet with any grandmasters or historians on the history of African Lodge number 1, for all minds and hearts to be clear among the craft?
Ask that question again.
All right. Did you meet with any grandmasters or historians on the history of African Lodge number 1, for all minds and hearts to be clear among the craft?
I've met with a few grandmasters. So I don't, you know, again, I have a book out. They have the opportunity to read it. I've spoke with grandmasters. I spoke with them personally. They're interested in the work. Brother Dave Gillarm is a grand historian. Brother Upchurch is a grand historian. Brother James Morgan is an associate grand historian. So yeah, I've spoke to grand historians, and I've spoke to grandmasters. And again, I've received no negative response to the work except from one jurisdiction, and that's it.
And Brother Harrison, if I may, just something that I want to point out, because this is something that we talked about way back over a year ago now on the very first episode of the Think Tank, where we talked about the idea of collaboration between historians. And I just wanted to say, you know, with regards to your character and your methodology for researching, family who's watching, you best believe that this brother calls this phone fairly often, or he receives calls from his phone very often. And I know for a fact that the same is true for Brother Collins and Brother Gillarm and a number of others. I mean, even if you just look at the back of the book here, we've got Ralph McNeil, who is a fellow of the Philaxis Society, no stranger to the Prince Hall Think Tank family. He's got Brother Michael Poe, Chris Hodap. I mean, one thing that I thought was very fascinating about it was that you really did take the time to kind of run it through the mill of the people who you felt were credible to critique it. I mean, you got it edited by Brother Oscar Allen Brother Oscar Allen, from the Grand Lodge of New York. So I really wanted to commend you for that as well. Has there been any in your, because I know you've been traveling a little bit too, with the book. Has there been any anything you've noticed specifically, because I know you just got back from New York, from the older Grand Lodges that this kind of touches, that or anything that you'd like to see from some of the older Grand Lodges like Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, et cetera?
I would like Massachusetts to make a statement. But no, like I said, just give the book an opportunity. It's the book doesn't shut out other people to bring their research to the table. The book is, for us an opportunity to discuss the origin. Here is my research. Now you read it and you decide for yourself what you believe. And that's what I want to see from Grand Lodges is to give the book an opportunity to speak for itself, let the work speak for itself, and hopefully let's not inject politics into that process.
Brother Harrison, I have to put this disclaimer out there. We haven't talked
Mhm.
in it. We haven't talked in a we talk. We used to talk a lot, but we haven't talked as of late. But I want to make it extremely public that I do call you, and I give you. I know you don't need it, but I give you encouraging words. Not to be what's the word for it, a cheerleader of some sorts, because I know when you, like they say, sometimes when you tell the truth, that's when you get in the most trouble. And I call you out of the blue, or when I see something, and I say it with brotherly love and affection. But keep up the good work. I know you don't feel like hearing it sometimes, but on this side of the coin, when we put out information or we find something, even some stuff that we're working on the Scottish Rite side, the conversations that Dave and I are having are the similar conversations that you're having with this book. Some of the information that's going to be coming out isn't, like they say, your mama isn't always pretty. She can be ugly, and that reality of it. But keep on keeping on, and don't allow certain things to hold you down, and just continue fighting the good fight, telling the truth.
Absolutely.
All right. One other question that we had was, I guess during your research, have you found any minutes proceedings from the Grand Lodge of England discussing the issuing the charter to African Lodge 459?
No. In fact, I'm actually working. I actually have a job with the Grand Lodge of Washington Library, and they have a lot of proceedings from the United Grand Lodge of England also. But none of their records go past 1870. I have only saw the 1792 quarterly communications, which is actually a part of the records of Africa Lodge, where the United Grand Lodge of England lists Africa Lodge as a member charter, in what year, in what location. In fact, it was stated the fact that the United Grand Lodge of England, or the Grand Lodge of England at that time, had actually investigated Africa Lodge. But when I wrote to the archivist out there to see if there was any information on an investigation of Africa Lodge, they had absolutely no documentation of any investigation of Africa Lodge prior to the reception of the charter. So, no.
Now, Brother Harrison, one question just came to mind, and just kind of hit me when you were talking about records. Now, we know that the African Lodge minutes were microfilmed. Can you kind of walk us through a little bit of from what you know of the history of the actual hard copy? Like, do the hard copies exist today, or if they don't, how did they get from the possession of African Lodge or Prince Hall Grand Lodge or what have you? How did they get to being microfilmed in the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, and how did that kind of come about? Are you aware? Is there any record of that at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually written in Joseph Walk's book, Prince Hall Mission, regarding the microfilm. The Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts turned over the records of Africa Lodge for preservation purposes. It was a sister, Heather Calloway, actually spoke at the Academy of Masonic Knowledge on the preservation of Masonic records. And this is a huge issue in Prince Hall Grand Lodges. We have records, sometimes we don't, but when we do, there's not a great method of preservation of those records. And sometimes they get water damaged. They get molded. They become unreadable, unintelligible, so on and so forth. And so the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts turned over the records to the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts for preservation purposes. And when they did so, to keep the book from being damaged, the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts then put the records on microfilm so they could be kept and observed, and the actual minute book could be further preserved without people handling it. You understand? Because they were actually put to microfilm in 1950. And so prior to that, people had to handle the records. You see what I'm saying? So then they went on and put them on microfilm, so that way people wouldn't be handling something as precious as that. They can get the same records out of there as the microfilm. So, yeah.
Now, speaking about African Lodge's records, could you kind of break down to us? I guess there was been stated there were 2 sets of records, and the second one that was written was written by John T. Hilton, and it didn't properly reflect the initial minutes. Could you kind of walk us through that about how the 2 sets of minutes come to be?
What was the storyline was that they believed that the records were rewritten by John T. Hilton. They thought there was only 1 set of records, but those were actually rewritten by John T. Hilton. So they said that the records were unreliable because they were rewrites. In fact, Joseph Walk stated that. And then when I actually got the records myself, I found 2 sets of records. I found the original set of records, which I knew were written by members of Africa Lodge prior to John T. Hilton, because they were all in different handwritings reflecting the difference in secretaries who were doing the transcribing of the minutes. And then the second set had the same years, but they were all the same handwriting. Those were the John T. Hilton transcripts. Now, when you read both of these together, there are and I'm saying the reason why we can't say that they're transcriptions or exact replicas of the original is because what he did was he corrected the spelling. There was some spelling that needed to be corrected, and he corrected the spelling, and he also maybe said where one thing says no business lodge closed, he probably said the lodge was closed in due form. You see what I'm saying? The theme of what was written wasn't changed. What happened didn't change. It was just that John T. Hilton made it readable, because once you see both sets of the records that were written prior, some of them were easy to read. You knew exactly what it was saying. And then some of them were very hard to read. The spelling was a little bad. And so the John T. Hilton records, if you want to know what they really said, that's what you read. If you want to read it directly straight out the original, that's what you would read. But they still reflect the same thing. There's 2 sets of records, not 1. And that's the thing that I also found in the records too, that kind of disputed that particular theory that, there was only 1 set of records and they're unreliable because John T. Hilton rewrote the records. Well, we got both sets of the records, so you choose which one you want to read.
That's powerful stuff, brother.
Yeah.
That's powerful stuff.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, now, for the if you had, I guess, words of advice for the researcher out there, and we all in the same groups, and we see that there are brothers that make the statements, "Oh, I can't accept just what's written in this book." As a researcher, how would I go about accessing some of the resources that you use to write this book?
In the back of the book, I actually put a bibliography, and I did. And see, the thing that I wanted to do differently, that I hadn't seen in a lot of Masonic books, was right in the middle of the text, show the document, so that you're reading and then boom, the document in your face, so that you can see it for yourself. The second thing I did, which ain't nothing new, was I wanted to make sure that I put a bibliography so a person could go right to the same places that I received every document utilized to write the book is right there in the bibliography. You understand? You got documents in text, you have appendices, and then you have a bibliography. So all you got to do is follow the paper trail. You understand? Go to the same places, ask for the same documents, and you'll have everything written. That's what you can do. Yeah.
Wow. Well, definitely. Thank you for that, Brother Hairston. We're going to look at, if there are no other questions from the panelists, we're going to look at wrapping this episode up. And we want to thank you for your time. This book, Landmarks of Our Fathers, is an excellent read. Brother Hairston did an outstanding job on the research to put into this book. Even if you don't agree with the book, you have to commend the person that puts in this amount of research into writing this material. He basically talked to people all over the world, gathering resources to write this book. And I believe this episode, we kind of cleared up the air about what this book is about, what his intent was, and encouraging you all to go out and read this book. And instead of going off the accepted narrative, to go with what the documentation states. So now we're going to have parting comments from Brother James Morgan.
Okay. Well, first of all, Brother Hairston, I want to say, that it's no secret for those who follow the Prince Hall Think Tank, you have been definitely one of the most requested by the fans, by the viewers, one of the most requested guests on the show. So this was highly anticipated. No, don't thank us. That's your work, and that's the people speaking. So I want to thank you for accepting our invitation. As well as, again, congratulate you on this. And I do want to kind of mention, that you did give Brother Gillarm a shout out in this book. Being humble about it, but you did give him a shout out in there. So I wanted to make sure I acknowledge that. Brothers and sisters who are out there watching Landmarks of Our Fathers, check it out. And I look forward to seeing everybody next month.
All right. Thank you for that, Brother Morgan. Next, Brother Hairston, we're going to get your parting comments. Let us know anything that you want us to know, and especially your upcoming events, speaking engagements, etc.
Landmarks of Our Fathers, you can get the book at landmarksofourfathers.com. The link is posted all over the place, and so you can get it there. There's 2 editions. Let's remember that. We have the special edition that has the seal, the signature, the number, and the number actually corresponds to your name on the Grand Registry of the Landmarks of Our Fathers website. It also comes with an extra appendix with a lot of important records, like David Walker's initiation into Freemasonry, so on and so forth. Then there's the regular edition, which you can get through the book patch, and that it doesn't come with all the bells and whistles. So if you're just interested in the content alone, that's the book for you. But if you want the special edition with the seal and so on and so forth as a commemorative piece, then that's what you would want to get. Upcoming events, I think I'm a chill for a moment until about December, and then I'll be in the great Peach State of Georgia, out there in Atlanta at the Grand Masters Research out there with those brothers. Is it 3 Masonic District 3 East? Okay, and I'll be out there with those brothers. They invited me out there, so I'll go out there and give my presentation out there in Georgia. Then after that, man, I got things in play, but there's no definitives as of yet. You know how you go to and you do a presentation and somebody else want to hear it somewhere else, but there's information forthcoming and so on and so forth. And so other than that, and gathering information for my new book that's going to be coming out probably late 2017, early 2018. That's pretty much what's going on with us.
I do want to do one shameless plug, because we talked about the future and we talked about the present, but we haven't acknowledged the past. Brother Hairston is also a co-author of the book, and I think we talked about it on a previous episode, Greatest Prince Hall Masons of the 20th Century. You did an excellent
Yeah.
chapter in there on Brother
Comrade Rideout.
Comrade Rideout. Man, I love that
Yeah.
chapter. Love that chapter, as well as he's a contributor to Phylaxis. So this brother is not new. He's not new to this. He's true to this. So I want to make sure we acknowledge that as well, to make sure we approach this in a holistic way.
Now, one more shameless plug, because this article is not getting enough light because of this book. The Phylaxis Society published an article called The Reading of the Minutes. Especially you Philadelphia brothers, you brothers from Pennsylvania, go check that article out. That's a great article on the formation of the first independent African Grand Lodge out there in Pennsylvania. But that article is not receiving the attention it's supposed to because of this book. Yeah.
And Brother Harrison, if you don't mind, could you post a link to that article on the Prince Hall Think Tank Facebook group?
Yes, we'll do it.
As long as probably need if you can repost where to purchase the book, even though it's been put out there several times. I know we have a couple of viewers and they're following the group right now, so maybe refreshing that information would probably be a good idea as well.
Okay, good deal.
Yeah.
We'll do it.
All right, and we're gonna have parting comments from Brother Ken Collins.
So there's no Sweet Home Alabama this week.
Thank God.
Hey, boy, I tell you, them haters in DC, boy, I tell you. No, really, this has been a great episode. Again, Brother Harrison, I commend you on the hard work you put in, the time and sacrifice that you put in to making sure we had some true and square work. Like they say, you can't refute the truth. Light is light, no matter where it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, this has been like I said, a great episode. This is the Prince Hall think tank's growing. The conversation on your book is growing. And we see good things coming out in terms of the history of Prince Hall Freemasonry, in terms of projects that we're still working on. We have so many things in the works that it's part of that scatterbrain issue that we end up having. We're working on so many different things. Our hands are in so many different pots that you can't move one thing forward because you're moving by inches, and some of them. Wanted to give a heads up to some of the viewers that I also want to give Dave Gillarm a pat on the back. Just 2 weeks ago, we were at about a week and a half ago, we were at the Supreme Council for the Southern Jurisdiction there, the 33rd degree class, and Brother Gillarm, along with myself, we gave the history lecture over the history of the Supreme Council from the beginning of the Scotch Lodge up until the United Supreme Council to 1900. And it was a great conversation because it's something that's never been talked about before from the information that we've received at our Supreme Council. So I wanted to give Brother Gillarm a heads up on that, and a pat on the back for that. We're going to have some information coming out on that as far as the slides and presentation for the local areas. But again, things are coming along pretty good in terms of what we've been working on. Everybody out there, if you get a chance, pick up a copy of the book, but not only pick up a copy of the book, read it. That's always my tagline when I sign off. If you see a book, pick it up and read it, and not only read it once, read it 2 or 3 times. That way you can get something out of it.
All right, thank you for that, Brother Collins. And yeah, it was indeed a pleasure to be able to present with you at the Supreme Council session. That was a first for me. I don't get nervous often, and that was one of the few times I actually got nervous presenting. And as you stated earlier, it was also just part 1. We're going to do part 2 next year in Jacksonville, Florida. So stay tuned for that. And as you also stated, the slides from part 1 are going to be coming out shortly.
Hey, Brother Gillarm, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just got to say this, man. This whole episode, I've been watching you, listening to you and everything, and I've been noticing the picture of you with the fez on. And it's like, it's been creeping me out the whole episode. I'm sorry. I've been looking at it. I'm like, I hope one day when I'm, when I grow up, I can be half as great of a noble as you are, sir. I hope one day I can be half as great.
I just try hard, man.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna keep at it.
And as far as other upcoming events with the Prince Hall Think Tank, for our regular followers, our show has always been on the last Sunday of the month. And now we're trying to look at changing things and implement some of your suggestions. So that's why we have a show on a Wednesday night. And we're still gonna have for our next show, it's gonna be part of the Young Leaders mini-series, which has also been highly requested. And we're looking at having the Right Worshipful Deputy Grand Master, Corey D. Shackelford Sr. from the great state of Georgia on that episode, and Most Worshipful Kimphis Muhammad from the Prince Hall Grand Lodge in Minnesota. We're gonna be talking about kind of the importance of voting, some things about current events, and it's gonna be and some other stuff we're gonna talk about. I can't let out just yet, but you definitely want to tune into this show. As always, we take your comments, your suggestions, and we try to implement these in future shows. Feel free to shoot your comments and texts and messages as usual. And we want to thank you all for your support, for allowing us to go over that 1 year mark. And we cannot close out a show without thanking Brother Antonio Caffey for having the vision to start the Prince Hall Think Tank. So as always, thank you for your support, and we look forward to seeing you at our next show. Good night.